If you are joining us for the first time, hello and welcome. If you are a returning supporter and friend, welcome back. Today we'll be taking a look back at the history of federal referendums in Australia. What are they? How they work? What changes have resulted? What we've got out of them as a country? How much have they cost the Australian taxpayer? And some other fun facts. Let's get straight into it. Firstly, what is a federal referendum in Australia? This is essentially the process by which we as a nation can make changes to our constitution. For small and simple laws, a bill passed through both houses of parliament is enough. But for things about how the government is structured or the power of the parliament, we need a referendum. Section 128 of the Constitution, Mode of Altering, states that any change to the Constitution, we first must need a bill passed by an absolute majority of each house of the federal parliament, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then that proposal is submitted in each state and territory to the electors qualified to vote, as in us, the public. If the proposal receives the majority of votes in a majority of states, 4 out of 6, this is sometimes referred to colloquially as a double majority. If this happens, it should then be presented to the Governor-General for the Queen's assent or approval. This is sometimes referred to as royal assent. This is the final step in the process for a change to our constitution to be confirmed. Votes in the territories count toward the national total, but the result of that region does not count as a state. Next, let's look at referendum results. Since Federation in 1901, 44 proposals have been put forward to the people for a vote in 19 different referendums. Of the 44 questions, only 8 proposals were successful or carried. These include the Senate election alignment in 1906, state debt tariff surplus issues in 1910, state debt arrangements and management in 1928, implementation of social services in 1946, state voting clarity in 1967, which we'll speak about in a moment, Senate vacancy replacements, retirement age of federal judges, and referendums themselves in 1977. This means that over 80% of proposed changes were knocked back by the Australian voting public. Now let's take a closer look at the 1967 referendum. This is most commonly known as a proposal for giving Aboriginal Australians voting rights. This is strictly speaking not completely accurate. The process of affording Aboriginal Australians the right to vote at a federal level started in 1949 with the Commonwealth Electoral Act 1949, which gave Aboriginal people the right to vote in federal elections, provided they were eligible to do so in state elections. This condition rendered many Aboriginals ineligible. This injustice and inconsistency was righted by the passage of the Commonwealth Electoral Act 1962, which gave all Aboriginal people the option to enrol to vote federally. Full compulsory voting for Aboriginal Australians did not come in until 1983. The 1967 referendum simply changed the wording of Section 122 of the Constitution regarding the governing of the territories. The 67 referendum was still a historical day in Australian history and a great step forward. However, when it comes to reconciliation with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, we as a country still have plenty of work ahead of us. This vote was the most supported in Australian referendum history, with a 90.33% yes vote. Now let's have a look at how much all of this costs. From the 1967 referendum mentioned earlier to the present, we have had 7 referendums, 20 proposed questions, only 4 of which have been carried. The following table shows the nominal cost of the referendum and the adjustment for inflation to $2,020. Over the last 54 years, the following 4 changes have cost us, the taxpayer, $381 million in real terms. These 4 changes are the State Voting Clarity, 1967, which we spoke about earlier, and then 3 more minor changes in 1977, namely the Senate vacancy replacements, retirement age of judges, and a tweak to the rules regarding referendums. That's almost $100 million per change. I'm not against the system, I'm simply trying to illustrate that the progress is slow and expensive. Notice the cost of democracy has rapidly steepened over time, which brings us to the next point. The first referendum in 1906 cost the Australian taxpayers in total just over £48,000, which not only included a referendum, but an election of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. This cost, adjusted for inflation to $2020, is $7.4 million. As a comparison, the 2019 election, which did not have a referendum, cost us the taxpayers $372.4 million. That's a 50-fold increase. And to put that in perspective, the population of Australia in 1906 was 4 million. The population in 2019 was 25 million. A 6-fold increase in population for a 50-fold increase in cost. Now a quick one on compulsory voting. The first 13 referendums proposed between 1906 and 1919 had an average voter turnout rate of 62.13%. Compulsory voting was introduced in 1924 to encourage political involvement. Since then, the 30 proposals have had an average voter turnout rate of 94%. Now to another fun fact. So far we have only discussed federal referendums, whereby all Australians vote to make changes to the Australian Constitution. However, states have a very similar process for change. One of the most bizarre examples of this came on the 8th of April 1933. A referendum was put to the people of Western Australia to secede from the Commonwealth of Australia and in doing so seek to become their own independent nation. The case for the move was largely based around the federal intervention in the state and that Western Australia contributed the lion's share of federal government revenue through mining related taxes and import tariffs. This was by no means the first or only time the idea of seceding came up, but it was by far the most significant. The vote was passed by the public. Just under 139,000 Western Australian voters voted for the move, a 66% agreement. However, Western Australia is still part of Australia today because the British Parliament wouldn't allow such a change. The WA Parliament sought special permission and sent a select committee over to the UK to lobby for the right to secede. Part of the reason for the UK government's decision to block this was that such a decision would not be in the greater good of all Australians. In the preamble to the Constitution, before Section 1, an Act to constitute the Commonwealth of Australia, it refers to the newly made Commonwealth as indissoluble, but Western Australia is not mentioned in this section. The first mention of Western Australia is not until Section 3, Proclamation of the Commonwealth. This could be a function of Western Australia having reservations pre-federation about joining Australia from the beginning. In conclusion, the system for changing the Constitution in Australia is slow, costly and complicated. And like all related governmental mechanisms, it is a function of politics. However, I wouldn't have it any other way. My opinion, we have one of the best systems of government on earth. Application of that system by people is far from perfect, but that's hardly the system's fault. This has been Unboxing Economics. Please like and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, history is more than just a bunch of stuff that happened. Thank you for watching.